But my name is Robert McCrea. I'm an attorney, and I am the new landscape conservation attorney at the Conservation Law Center in Bloomington. And before I begin into detail about the Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape project, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Conservation Law Center. John, if you want to do the next slide. There we go. It's a little bit more of my bio there. But the Conservation Law Center, or CLC, was started in 2005 by a gentleman named Bill Weeks, who's actually a real leader in conservation easements. He worked for Nature Conservancy when they were really getting into more kind of broader ecosystem management and landscape conservation projects. He started CLC in 2005, and we run the environmental law clinic for the law school. So a lot of what we do is to kind of educate the next generation of attorneys who are interested in environmental law and conservation law and natural resource law by giving them some practical experiences, supporting the work the Conservation Law Center does. And we are a nonprofit public interest law firm. We represent the public on environmental issues. We specialize in anything involving what's called the public trust. And in fact, we just had a case decided in our favor that went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court involving the public trust doctrine on an issue along the lake shore of Lake Michigan. And to kind of give you a little idea of what public trust, because it's something not many folks know about, is the public trust doctrine is the doctrine that sort of grants the public rights to up to the high water mark on certain bodies of water and certain navigable rivers and so forth. So all of, like for the White River, for example, is certainly a navigable river, and the public has full access to that up to the high water mark, even if it crosses somebody else's land. Now you can't get out onto that person's land, but you can use the river for commerce and your livelihood and things like that. The case in Michigan involves some landowners who are unhappy about folks walking along the beach of Lake Michigan in front of their homes and wanted to stop that. And so Conservation Law Center represented the public interest groups who took on that case, who wanted the public to have access to that area, and we were successful after a long multi-year battle that, as I said, went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. We are experts in what are called conservation easements, and I'll talk a little bit about that because that's going to be a big part of the Sentinel Landscape project. And we also just help nonprofits with general nonprofit management advice and legal support and things like that. And all of the students that are part of the clinic help with the research, help with the drafting of the legal memos that make their way into court briefs and things like that. And so again, we just give law students that practical experience, something a little more experiential and hands-on, you might say, than just sitting in the classroom and being lectured to or arguing with your professor all afternoon. So last year, Conservation Law Center was a key partner, including along with some representatives from Crane and also the Nature Conservancy, which is a group you've probably heard of. They're actually the nation's largest land trust or conservation organization. They got the Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape project approved. John, if you want to actually go to the next slide, this just talks a little bit more about, sorry to jump around, this just talks a little bit more about what CLC does. Those are some of the issues that we focus on. John, if you're going to do the next slide. This photograph, by the way, was taken over in Monroe County at Sycamore Land Trust Bean Blossom Bottoms Preserve. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. It's one of the only places in this part of the state where you can walk through a wetland area on a boardwalk and just experience the nature in a way that otherwise you wouldn't be able to, because no one's going to walk around through all that muck and water. John, if you want to do the next slide. Okay, so the Sentinel project. This was approved just last year for Southern Indiana, and we became two of the most recent Sentinel Landscapes in the country. There are now a total of 10 Sentinel Landscape projects. And what these are is they are a partnership with the Department of the Defense, the Department of the Interior, which manages, the Forest Service, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And what we're trying to do, what the Sentinel Landscape tries to do, is to protect, you might say, the mission of military installations from encroachments or incompatible land uses that might impair the purposes for which they exist. One of the best examples of this is one I'm going to be talking in detail about, is the Lake Glendora Test Facility, which is part of Crane, where they test explosives for munitions. And it's an underwater testing facility, and it's not very big. It's only like 400 acres, but it's surrounded by private land. And you could imagine if there's a bunch of homes built right outside of the boundary, all of the complaints that are going to be made from noise and so forth from these explosions going off. So what Sentinel does is it tries to minimize that by protecting surrounding agricultural land and just natural land. The Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, and Department of Interior realized how, environmental conservation and protection of agricultural land kind of goes hand in hand with protecting the missions of these various military installations across the country. And so it's a great relationship. It's bringing all kinds of different stakeholders and partners to the table, and a lot of conservation work has been done. This was a program that was officially started in 2013. That's when the federals got formal federal recognition, and since that time, there have been over 3 million acres kind of enrolled into the Sentinel Landscape program, and 500,000 of those acres is land that is permanently protected. So it's been amazingly successful. So some of the goals, the primary goal of the Sentinel Landscape is to protect the purpose or the mission readiness of the various military installations. Also to protect and enhance agricultural land uses, protect water quality, support sustainable timbering and forestry practices, and then also to provide habitat for endangered species. In the area around Crane, that's actually been deemed critical habitat for an endangered species called the Indiana bat. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be working on, is to protect more habitat for the Indiana bat outside of Crane's, outside of the military or the base boundary there. John, if you want to go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about landscape scale conservation. And I'm going to if everybody could just kind of take a mental note of that. John, could you go to the next slide? I want to get to the one. If you could jump ahead to the one with the map, please. And we might go back to these. There we go. So this is the southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape. It's over 3.5 million acres large, so it's huge. This is the size of the state of Connecticut, approximately, in terms of the land area that we're dealing with. And it includes 4 main military installations: Lake Glendora, over there by the town of Sullivan, which I mentioned, Crane, which you all know very well, Camp Atterbury, and the Muscatatuck Training Center right there, and then the Indiana Air Range Complex. So the goal here is to try to protect and get sort of enrolled in conservation programs, first and foremost, the properties that are immediately around the military installations, and then after that to try to work on this landscape scale conservation project. John, if you could go back to the previous slide. So within the landscape, there are 6 state parks, 7 state forests, 9 fish and wildlife areas, 39 state dedicated nature preserves, 3 national wildlife refuges, and the Hoosier National Forest. So there's already a ton of really high quality natural areas within the Sentinel landscape. And what we want to do is to use those as kind of core areas along with the military installations to work with landowners to protect agricultural land and natural habitat to build connectivity within the landscape. That's what landscape conservation is working across these huge scales and working with all of the different interest groups that exist within those areas and all of the different value systems to try to get folks involved in conservation so that we just have this huge connected landscape, if you will, of land that's protected, or maybe it's just land that's involved in like a sustainable timber practice, like many folks are required to do if they're enrolled in the state classified forest program. And so one of the key things the Sentinel Landscape does, it does 2 things. The first is it supports a coordinator to essentially do all of this work. And I'm one of the co-coordinators, if you will, of the Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape Project. My partner who works on that is a gentleman named Michael Spalding, and he actually just got back today. He's also a wildland forest fighter, and he's been out west working on some of the forest fires for the past few weeks. So he and I are putting together the plan and starting to reach out to all of the stakeholders and partners of this Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape Project to just get it organized and started. I've only been on the job for about 3 weeks. Mike started a few weeks before me, but we are basically on the ground floor of this. So one of the things the Sentinel Landscape Project supports is it pays essentially for the coordinators to do this and gives them resources to organize all of this effort. The second thing it does, and something that we're working towards, is it helps with existing federal funding to prioritize funding available for landowners that are in the Sentinel Landscape area if they're interested in getting involved in a conservation practice. So, for example, through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, you can get federal funding to do like a timber management plan on your property and maybe manage your property for like sustainable timber harvest. Or if you have a lot of invasive species on your property, you can get federal funding to help remove those invasive species just to help the health of your forest. If you're a farmer, there might be federal funding for you to switch over to like a no-till crop production or planting of cover crops and things like that. If you wanted to take farmland out of production for a couple years through the Agricultural Reserve Easement Program, there's federal funding to help you with that. And so one of the things that we're going to be working on is to make sure that there's prioritization, if you will, for landowners within the Sentinel Landscape who want to get involved in those programs to have a better opportunity to do so. And one of the neat things that the way that this does is it seeks private partners to help support this. So organizations, like large endowments that support things, conservation related activities, can sort of also get involved in supporting this as well. So it's kind of like a federal match, if you will. The feds pay some, but also private conservation groups can pay some as well. You want to go back to the map, John? So we're going to be working throughout this entire area, but I would say for the first few years, probably focusing around in the areas immediately around the military installations. One of the reasons we're going to do that is because there's a lot of planning that needs to happen. But the military installations already have what's called the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, where they already have the capability to work with private partners to acquire land, within what are called these REPI boundaries. That might be that's the area in lighter pink there, to acquire private land or to work with landowners to place land into what's called a conservation easement, so it stays protected. And the goal here is the same, is they're trying to minimize that encroachment or incompatible use that may someday threaten the ability of Crane to carry out the work that it does on the base there. I mentioned earlier that the Conservation Law Center is a real expert in what are called conservation easements. Are those things that folks here have heard about, or is that kind of a new thing? It's a little bit of an unusual conservation practice, but what it is, for those of you who don't know, is if you're a private landowner and you want to have your property protected into the future, but still want to retain ownership of it, maybe you want to be able to sell it in the future or give it to your kids or grandchildren or something, a conservation easement will allow you to do that. And so you work with a land trust, like Niches, where John was involved, or Sycamore Land Trust in Bloomington, which covers Lawrence County, and they become the holder of a conservation easement, and that will restrict certain uses like commercial uses or industrial uses or subdivision to prevent like a housing subdivision from being placed on the property. But the landowners still own it, and they can sell it. They can use the property so long as the use isn't incompatible with the spirit of the conservation easement. You can still hunt, you can still cut timber. If it's an agricultural easement, you can still use it for agriculture, but the land, stays, those uses stay protected, and you keep ownership of it. That's one of the things that this REPI program authorizes the Navy to do, is to enter into those kinds of transactions with surrounding landowners, but they also need a land trust to be a partner with that. So this is the beginning of really a decades-long project. Some of the immediate goals that we want to accomplish this year include working on some key land protection activities in the area around the Lake Glendora test facility, just because that is an area that's really highly threatened by incompatible land uses nearby. We're going to be having a meeting and organizing sort of a leadership structure with a lot of the major partners of the Sentinel Landscape, including the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Indiana Department of Natural Resources, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, local co-ops and agricultural industry groups, some of the land trusts in the area, Nature Conservancy, to really get a good sort of executive leadership team in place that will kind of oversee and guide this project through fruition. And then start to work on our outreach messaging and how we provide support to landowners, so we hopefully will be interested in becoming a part of the Sentinel Landscape. Again, it's our job as coordinators to really be the messengers and to really kind of enhance the support, you might say the sign-up support that landowners get so they can be part of these programs. Oftentimes it's very intimidating to figure out what's going on, how do you get started, and that sort of thing. So we're going to be the ones that help individual landowners with that and get them enrolled in this project. So be happy to answer any questions that you guys have about the Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape Project. This is really exciting, and Lawrence County and Bedford are right in the heart of it.
Is the Lake Lindor, is that the old Peabody area?
Yeah, it is old. It is, I think, an old Peabody coal mine era.
Okay.
Yep.
Thousands of acres.
Well, they have thousands of acres still that Peabody owns. The Lake Glendora facility is just a few hundred. It's not very big. Yeah.
If owners put their land in protected trust or whatever, and then down the road, a couple decades from now, they or their heirs want to change that, modify it, or take it out, can that be done?
The short answer is no, it cannot be done. The conservation easement is permanent and perpetual. What we do, though, is we try to anticipate what kind of uses a landowner may want to utilize in the future. For example, if a family envisions in building another home or something like that, we make sure we leave area that's not encumbered by the conservation easement out of it, so you can do anything you want on that area that's not covered by the conservation easement. Yeah, but it can be difficult to amend conservation easements once they're in place. Mm-hmm.
When you protect the habitat, are you protecting the rivers and creeks?
Yeah. So another one of our goals, our priorities, is really going to be to protect the watershed of the White River. That's part of the boundaries. The way this is drawn up was to try to capture a lot of that. And the Nature Conservancy, that's a priority of one of the Nature Conservancy.
Can you restrict farmers from using poisonous fertilizer?
Yeah. No, we can't. But the idea is to try to work with them to make a change. Yeah. Well, this is something that we're in the long haul for. This is going to take years and years, and change is going to be incremental. So you might think of the Sentinel Landscape project kind of existing in the background of all of these existing programs. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to just get more people enrolled in these programs, to establish that priority system that I mentioned, because these are competitive. If you apply for something, you may not get it because there might be somebody that's higher priority than you. Well, we want people in the Sentinel Landscape to get a few extra points when they submit an application, so they have a better chance of being approved. And in the future, we're going to be working towards expanding or making these, what I call, funding pools larger. We want some money that would come from federal support, but also private support, to just be available for folks within the Sentinel Landscape to use to help them with conservation practices on their land. Yeah.
I think strangely sometimes, but what about Crane if he'd like to try out a new bomb on their property? They're going to have to go through your agency to get permission.
No, they won't. We don't have any authority for things like that at all.
That's way out.
The Indiana Air Range, is that the old testing ground, the proving grounds for the thousands of acres over there where there's bombs have been set off all those years?
That is correct. Yep.
Yeah. So that's really a natural area.
Yeah.
Nobody was in there.
Right. And I think that's actually the area where there's been a black bear that's spotted every now and then that comes from up north, or comes from Kentucky.
Supposedly around here too.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. I haven't heard that yet. Yeah.
Something that came in the news in the Dakotas. Is this why the Chinese company bought in the land around the military base out there? Hit the news this week.
Haven't heard of that.
Is that because they bought out there because it's not near navigable waters? They bought a bunch of land near a military base. That's 300 acres. They're going to put in a feed mill.
Huh.
I believe we got the right state, the Dakotas.
Yeah.
And we're afraid that through something or other we'll give away secrets because they bought the
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that. Yeah,
Just recent news last week.
yeah, no, I haven't heard anything about that yet.
But anyhow, point out Bedford and Mitchell on the map, or,
It'd be right around here somewhere, I think.
yeah, okay.
Yep, or a little further south of that maybe, yeah.
If you have a piece of land and you want to enroll in the Sentinel
Mhm.
project, how do you go about doing that?
Well, you could contact me or my partner Mike Spalding, or you could just go to the district conservationist for the Natural Resource and Conservation Service in your area, and they're with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and many of them have offices in the county soil and water conservation districts. They're the ones who ultimately enroll people in what's the EQIP program that I mentioned. Like if you want to do a timber management plan on your property, they can help you with that. Yeah. Yep. If you're interested in a conservation easement, that's something that I can help you put in touch with the right people to do that. Yep.
Got a question. Most of the land battles I'm hearing about use the term eminent domain, where there's a government agency taking away someone's land. So what kind of clout would you have against an eminent domain claim from a government agency beating that land if it's in violation of the conservatory?
Oh yeah, good question. And somebody asked me a similar question just the other day. Probably very little. Yeah, probably very little. The only land, in terms of like natural land, that I know that is really has a good chance of not being condemned by eminent domain are the state dedicated nature preserves. And there was a slide, I think there's like 39 of them in this area. So once you have state dedication, the statute that sets that up does not allow condemnation of that land or eminent domain.
It's just private property that you're going to lose.
Yeah, you would lose it to eminent domain. Yep, yep. And I think one of the reasons, I think part of the spirit behind the Sentinel Landscape program is I think if I had a hunch, if I was in the rooms when all of this was being discussed, I'm sure that the Army, the military's had conversations about using eminent domain to take land that they foresee as becoming an encroachment or an impairment. And I think what Sentinel Landscape does is it really tries to work with landowners to get them to voluntarily collaborate, so it doesn't have to come to that. I mean, this is really, this is one of the great things about the Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape project is it's purely voluntary, it's really collaborative, and it's bringing together all kinds of different folks who are getting interested in conservation, helping out the military, helping out our natural resources and agricultural production and stuff like that.
You're not planning.
We just want to build, we want to build to the extent that it's possible, and and it's a large and lofty goal. We want to build connectivity in natural areas to kind of connect these already existing natural areas. Like we want to connect Crane with the national forest and the state forest that's down in this area and so forth, with a matrix of private land that is, maybe there's a conservation easement on it. Maybe its level of protection is that it's enrolled in the state classified forest program, things like that. The conservation science that's out there right now is telling us that in order to really protect species and have healthy, aquatic ecosystems and wetland ecosystems, these habitats need to be connected in some way. They can't exist in isolation, but animals need to be able to migrate between them.
All right, well, we appreciate your offer.
You're welcome.
If anybody's got any questions later,
There's a few brochures. if you're interested, to tell you a little bit about the Sentinel program and the REPI program and then some of the federal programs that are available to landowners. So feel free to take one.